self-government, and we're going to impose our will.
You know, Bill, what's interesting is Bernie Sanders is traveling around the country and warning about a oligarchy and warning about that. But aren't we seeing what some are calling a judicial oligarchy?
Yeah, it's called projection. So they blame us for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that want to have this oligarchy of judges. Trump is dismantling things. You can't call somebody a dictator when they're giving up power.
Mm-hmm.
If he were taking power and taking money, but he's wanting to give back money and give back power to the people and get rid of these, the FEMA should be called the red tape department. When Katrina happened, that hurricane in New Orleans, and people on their little boats were rescuing their neighbors, FEMA comes in, stops them, and then they just take their good old time getting stuff done. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
These centralized bureaucracies are hurtful. Phyllis Schlafly continued her explanation. She said the founding fathers did not write a constitution that set up a judicial oligarchy. They gave us a government based on separation of powers.
Mm-hmm.
The mighty power of government was divided among three branches of government. Nothing in the U.S. Constitution justifies judicial supremacy. So it's like, wait a second. And then you have lots of examples through history of presidents in Congress saying, okay, Judge, we're going to ignore you. And I think we need to remind ourselves of some of these precedents.
I think so too, Bill, because are we not seeing the courts, the ones in black robes, in essence, but also pushing back against executive decisions? I mean, so you say that there's precedent, or she had said there's precedent for presidents pushing back against judicial overreach, but we are seeing that branch of government that's been pushing back on the legislative system and pushing back against the executive office as well.
Yeah, so Trump is not a globalist. He's not a one-world government guy.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to make America great again. And there are people that are globalists, and they have money, George Soros, and they buy politics. They rent mobs. So all these anti-Tesla resistance things, these are paid rioters. They actually did a psychological study, and they found out that most of these rioters are trans people, trans women, guys that I guess think they're girls, but they're the main demographic of people that are trashing Tesla. But the precedent for pushing back against judges. Justin Evans Smith wrote for the Federalist, March 21st, 2025. He said there is a precedent for presidents pushing back against judicial overreach. Abraham Lincoln ignored a Supreme Court ruling in 1861 when Chief Justice Roger Taney attempted to block his suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War. What was that? Well, there was a Democrat named John Merriman in Maryland organizing riots. And these riots were trashing federal buildings, destroying telegraph lines. I know it's hard for us to imagine Democrats organizing riots that trash things. Anyway, this John Merriman guy, because he was a Democrat attacking these federal buildings, the local Democrat police and court system would not arrest him. And Lincoln said, wait, this guy's a threat, and if you're not going to locally arrest him, I'm going to have an executive order to arrest him. And they tried to push back with the habeas corpus, and Lincoln ignored that and said, I'm going to arrest him anyway. So here Roger Taney was saying, no, you can't do that. And Lincoln said, I'm going to do it anyway. Another is Andrew Jackson. And this is the Worcester versus Georgia decision. And John Marshall made the decision. And Andrew Jackson just thumbs his nose at it and said, I'm going to do whatever I want. So here, this article by Justin Evans Smith said the executive branch is not bound by a lower court's political ruling, especially when it directly interferes with a lawful executive function. The real threat to democracy is a judiciary that believes it alone has the right to decide what the law is.
Wow. Exhibit A, what's happening right now in 2025.
Yeah, and even George W. Bush, March 3rd, 2004, said, "We will not stand for judges who undermine democracy by legislating from the bench and try to remake the culture of America by court order." So what's the remedy? Well, if we look at Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which defines the role of the judiciary, right? 3 articles, the first 3. First one is Congress, second one is President, third one is judiciary. So this third article says, judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain. So the only court set up by the Constitution is the Supreme Court. All the other courts, Congress created. And if they create it, they can uncreate it. It goes on, Article 3, Section 2. In all of their cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have the appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. So Congress can make exceptions to the laws. They can decide that we're not going to enforce certain things. And so that's what happened. Phyllis Schlafly
and Bill, so again, just to reiterate what you're saying here, it's only the Supreme Court then that's created by the Constitution, and all of the others, that was Congress, their jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, they could decide we're going to create 100 more federal courts if they wanted to, and we'll fund them. Or they could say we're going to get rid of all the federal courts and just have the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
they could do that. And Phyllis Schlafly comments on that exact thing. She said the Founding Fathers, in their wisdom, gave us the solution to the dilemma. All federal courts, other than the Supreme Court, were created by Congress, not by the Constitution. Whatever Congress creates, it can uncreate or regulate. She goes on, Congress can decide what sort of cases the federal court can hear or not hear. Article 3 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to define the jurisdiction of the federal courts. And she goes on, there's a long record of Congress limiting or withdrawing the jurisdiction of federal courts over specific subjects. And this has been used dozens of times. So several years ago, there was
let me just have a pause right there because we're up against a break. We're talking with Bill Federer today and the critical need to rein in judicial activism. Folks, were you aware that only the Constitution sets up the Supreme Court? All these other federal courts appointed by Congress and set up by Congress and funded by Congress in that regard? We're going to find out more information right after the break and where we go from here. We'll be back in just 1 minute on Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
If America is a secular nation, why are there so many spiritual themes in the monuments of our nation's capital? VCY invites you to see Stories in Stones.
Hi, I'm Tim Schmig, and this is Stories in Stones, highlighting the men and the manuscripts and the monuments of our national Judeo-Christian heritage. We're going to be looking at a couple of the sites that are often overlooked, but are really important to us as far as showing us the godly heritage that we have as a nation.
Join Dr. Tim Schmig to explore the fascinating stories behind historic monuments and gravestones in Stories in Stones. You'll discover the secrets they hold and learn about the past etched in stone. Stories in Stones contains a Blu-ray, a DVD, and a digital download all together for a donation of just $15. Call VCY America, 1-800-729-9829.
Friends, we are seeing judicial activism on full display across this nation, and there is a critical need to rein this in. Bill Federer is with us here today, and we're looking back, statements from the founders, but also statements from the Constitution itself as it relates to this matter. three separate equal branches of government, and we see collision taking place. Bill has given us many examples already. He's told us what the articles in the U.S. Constitution say on these matters. And Bill, just as we were going into that break, you brought up the name of Senator Tom Daschle. We remember him from South Dakota, but go ahead and pick up where you left off there.
Right. So Congress, there was a law that was an environmentalist law that said you cannot clean out brush under forests. You have all these overgrowth, and the environmentalists just wanted to leave it alone, let it grow, and so forth. Well, people that do forest management know that you have to clear out that dry, dead stuff, because if there's a fire, it'll spread real quick, and the whole forest will burn down. And so it's called brush clearing. And so they have this environmental law, and it forbade people from doing brush clearing. Well, Senator Tom Daschle got it pushed through Congress to take jurisdiction away from the federal courts over brush clearing. So people could clear the brush out, and they would be violating this environmental law, but no courts could hear any cases on the subject. So it basically took the teeth out of the law and made it invalid. And so he made this argument. It's called limiting federal court jurisdiction to, and another was the case of Jim Sensenbrenner. I think he was a congressman there in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yep.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
And so it's called the Real ID Bill. But there was the pushing of getting a wall built on the southern border near San Diego. Mm-hmm. And environmentalists would say, wait a second, you're going to be breaking this environmental law because, little animals that want to go from the one side of the border to the other won't be able to with this fence. So Jim Sensenbrenner passed this bill through the House, which took jurisdiction away from federal courts to hear environmentalist challenges to the completion of this border fence. So they could build the fence and be, quote-unquote, violating this environmentalist law, but no judge could hear a case to try to find anybody guilty because Congress took that authority away from the judges. And so this is a power that Congress has that, to be honest, they may have forgotten a little bit about,
right?
And we need to remind them. Number one is having programs like this, and I thank you so much for it. But everybody in the listening audience needs to call their congressman and say, you have jurisdiction over the federal courts, over every federal, except the Supreme Court, but you have jurisdiction over every other federal court, and limit them. Tell them that they cannot they cannot hear a case that deals with taking violent illegals that are killing and raping and keeping them in America. If there's any case that has to do with taking criminals out of the country, justices, you can't even hear that case. Another is if there's corruption, like paying 7 million people who have been dead Social Security checks every month. And DOJ found this out. And it's like, okay, federal judges, you can't hear any case challenging corruption in the government that we're trying to root out with DOJ. So the Congress, people need to call their congressman and say, you rein in these federal courts and these activist judges, these 235 judges that Chuck Schumer pushed through in December when a lot of senators, unfortunately, were not there. It's like, they were so happy that they won the election that they're like, oh, we're not going to. It's like, no. And so enough Republican senators skipped out, and Schumer got all these judges pushed in. Well, if we missed it there, let's make up for it by having the House and the Senate pass laws limiting the jurisdiction of these federal judges. Mm-hmm. And and then there's even a quote from Chief Justice Rehnquist that confirms that they have the authority. And it was 2004. Phyllis Schlafly includes this quote in her book. She says, Chief Justice William Rehnquist included in his annual report one significant sentence. And this is the sentence. There were several bills introduced in the last Congress that would limit the jurisdiction of the federal courts to decide constitutional challenges to certain kinds of government action. So he's like, you introduced bills last Congress, and they could have limited the federal courts. And he goes on, Schlafly goes on, Rehnquist's report implicitly confirms Congress has the Article III power to limit jurisdiction on constitutional issues and to take away from the federal courts the power to continue to do the sort of damage that they have been doing for the past several decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Bill, even in more current news, I mean, within the past few days, there have been more that have coming out and speaking out in regard to this matter of really Congress reining in the judiciary and the activism that's going on, removing more from them. And before you continue on, friends, again, as Bill said, you can contact your members of Congress and just say, hey, you are the one that has jurisdiction over the federal courts. You can reach out to your legislators, house.gov and senate.gov, the number 202-224-3121 and 202-225-3121. And I know others are also chiming in, so share with us some more contemporary quotes on this issue.
Yeah, and by the way, I actually helped publish the book Judicial Tyranny that I've quoted Phyllis Schlafly out of. But several of my books, one on socialism, one on Rise of the Tyrant, they all touch on this issue in case anybody wanted to get those. But you have Alan Dershowitz. He's a law professor that you've probably seen on TV. And so he even asserted that Congress has the power to reshape the judiciary by adjusting the number and the jurisdiction of the district courts. So here's Alan Dershowitz saying it, and even Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. So the Gateway Pundit published an article March 20th, 2025, and it stated, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has suggested that Congress could strip federal courts of jurisdiction. Quote, Congress has the authority to strip jurisdiction of the federal courts to decide these cases in the first place. The sabotaging of President Trump's agenda by resistant judges was predictable. Why no jurisdiction stripping bills teed up at the onset of this Congress? So he's like, you know, he used to be a congressman before he became governor. He's like, look, you should have known that they were going to do this. Why didn't you have these bills all ready to go? Mm-hmm. Now, you know, they were going through the choosing who was going to be the speaker, but now that we know it, they need to buckle down and get this done. And I think Mike Johnson's doing a great job, and I think he's going to go ahead and probably get some of this action that we've been talked about going. But he does need people to call their congressmen, because a lot of times people in leadership, if they have lots of people expressing a view, it gives them more authority, so to speak, more momentum to get something done. Rather, if they're the lone one calling for it, the media can try to slam them. But I love this quote that Phyllis Schlafly concludes her chapter with. She says, the role that judges play in our system of government should be like that of baseball umpires. But umpires are not permitted to change the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. The fans would not tolerate an umpire calling a batter out after 2 strikes.
Right.
I mean, could you imagine you're watching a game of strike 1, strike 2, you're out. It's like, well, wait a second. You just can't, just because you're an umpire means that you can't change the rule. Just because you're a judge, you can't change. You're supposed to make sure that they're enforced the way that the Congress wants it enforced, mm-hmm. not your will. And even one of my favorite Supreme Court justices is Clarence Thomas. And during his confirmation hearing, October 15th, 1991, and of course they're hammering away on him, and they asked him about judicial activism. And Justice Thomas replied, The role of a judge is a limited one. It is to interpret the Constitution where called upon, but at no point to impose his or her will or opinion in that process. You're not supposed to say, okay, I'm got a political agenda, I don't like the president's agenda, and I'm going to try to twist some words and twist some meanings of things to limit the president. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. Well, friends, let me give a couple pieces of information here. One of the books Bill referenced is Socialism. We do have that available here at Crosstalk. Our way of saying thank you for your gift of $20 or more. Bill also has a book, as he mentioned, on judicial, what's a full name of
Tyranny.
it? Judicial tyranny. And friends, right now you can even go to AmericanMinute.com and secure that book, AmericanMinute.com, other resources that are there as well. If you'd like to get on the phone with Bill on this issue today, our phone number here at Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. So, Bill, you talked about Congress can put a stop to this, to judges who have gone rogue, can remove their authority over certain issues. Does President Trump also have options over judicial overreach?
Yes. Matter of fact, Pam Bondi just decided to use a state secret provision that the same thing they do when they take a document and they redact stuff. It's like, okay, they're supposed to release documents, but they can say, okay, we're not going to release this. So this judge, Jeb Boasberg, was wanting all the details of the flights of sending these criminals out of America. And Pam Bondi said, no, state secret, we're not going to turn over that data to you. Mm-hmm. Right? You're just wanting to find some little minutia and try to get off the big picture, which is you're trying to limit the president's agenda.
Yeah, wow. And then also, Bill, here before the break, we're just over 30 seconds, does the judiciary itself, namely that of the U.S. Supreme Court, are they able to take action? Is it time for them to put their judicial house in order as far as the lower courts?
Yeah, they definitely can. They can either hear a case or refuse to hear a case. Mm-hmm. They can decide that there's an overreach of the lower courts. And then I think we need to put a little, light on some of the behavior of some of these, like John Roberts. There's articles coming up that he belonged to some club where they sort of hobnob with people that are on the left. And is that the way it's supposed to be? Are they being unduly influenced and not being objective? Wow.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and I see some of the lines lighting up here, all of them lighting up, as a matter of fact, at 800-733-9829. William J. Federer, our guest. We'll be back in 1 minute here on Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewreport.com. Texas, Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. There are 4 faithful pastors, along with many civilian citizens, that are holding a rally at the Capitol. It's a Judeo-Christian rally. It's to counter the Islamist groups that are coming and taking over Texas. Texas has clearly been targeted, and the Islamic countries have billions of dollars to use the media, pad the pockets of politicians, and the budget shortfalls of counties and cities. Texas has clearly been targeted with compounds, Islamic compounds, mosque, schools. They're teaching, because we sent in an undercover former federal agent last week, they're teaching things like child marriage and waging war against the Christian and the Jews. If they can take down Texas, they can take down any state.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Our topic today, the critical need to rein in judicial activism. William J. Federer is our guest. And friends, again, we do have that book on socialism through VCY. You can go to AmericanMinute.com for all of Bill's resources as well. Many great books there, and also stay tuned to his day-by-day online comments on events from history and lessons learned as well. Let's go to the phone lines, which are packed. Mark in Monroe, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Yeah, in my opinion, Chuck Schumer was completely ignored by the judicial system when he blatantly threatened the Supreme Court judges, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, he did.
He called them out, said, "Woe to you, you'll never know what hit you."
Yeah.
So, once again, the hypocrisy is astounding. Schumer can be ignored, but the U.S. president can be usurped by one selected judge.
Yeah.
I think these domestic enemies are the ones that really need to be acted on even before the enemy act.
Mark, that's a great point. Thank you. And let's revisit that clip from Chuck Schumer.
Fundamental rights. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Okay, great point from Mark there, Bill.
Yeah. That here you have Schumer inciting a mob.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're finding out that the Democrats have rent-a-mob, that you have individuals like Soros and others that are putting up the money to attack the Tesla stations and so forth. But here's Schumer. He was inciting a mob. And, I just Googled it, but it was Chief Justice John Roberts that appointed Jeb Boasberg to the FISA court. This is a very, very powerful court.
Yeah.
And this Boasberg that's standing against Trump was appointed to this important office by Chief Justice John Roberts.
Wow.
It's like, whose side is he on?
Wow. Let's go to Jim next in Wisconsin. Jim, you're on the air.
Hello, Bill. We've met. I really appreciate your ministry. Thank you so much, sir. But
God bless you.
Thank you. I wanted to say that I put action into words that Mr. Schmidt gave about contacting our congressman. I already contacted our congressman here in Wisconsin and let them know about this program. And the information that's in here is very, very useful.
Yeah.
And I hope they do that. I want to ask a question. What these judges are doing, ordering these planes to be turned around with these violent criminals in them, couldn't be considered giving aid and comfort to our enemies?
Well, Bill?
Yeah. I think they could be the ones called up with violating the law and assisting criminals and putting Americans in danger. And so, the tables need to be turned.
Yeah.
Here they are letting people across the border, and that girl was raped at the University of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at politics, there are groups that want violence, and they want to destabilize. When I wrote my book on socialism, I went through these countries after the World War II, and they were trying to build themselves up again, and the KGB would go in there and cause riots and then co-opt the media to blame the leader for the riots. And then when the people got upset enough, they would do a coup and take over, make the country a Soviet satellite. And so there's a whole psychology of mob psychology that wants to create violence. And so, unfortunately, this has been the Democrat tactic.
Jim, thank you for the call. We're going to move on to Ron in Tri-Cities, Washington. You're on the air.
Yes, Mr. Federer, I would think that they should go to Article 3, the very second sentence, and that states that judges should hold their office during good behavior. They took an oath to the U.S. Constitution, and if they are not complying with that, then they should be removed from office. There are a lot of judges behaving badly, and if they're not demonstrating good behavior, then they should hang up their black robe and go chase an ambulance.
Okay. Thank you for your comment there, Ron. Tom?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
I personally think that they are doing an overreach. There have been judges impeached in the past for overreaching. And so I think that some people say, well, you need 2/3 of the Senate to impeach, and you're never going to get that. It's like, maybe even if they can't get the votes, they need to feel a little bit of attention on them, and maybe some investigations, and maybe just that alone would deter them from doing these terrible things.
And we've got Tommy calling from Ostrander, Minnesota. Tommy, you're on the air.
Hi. According to one a biography that I read of President Thomas Jefferson, he fired 6 federal judges because they were overreaching. We need to do that some more.
Wow. Bill, can a president fire federal judges?
That's really good. I think I'm going to look that one up. I do know that there's power that, Andrew Jackson, as I mentioned, decided to totally disregard the Supreme Court decision. But that's a good one to look up.
Great. So, thank you for the call.
I'm going to check that out.
And Roger in Marble, Minnesota, you're on the air. Hello, Roger. You're on the air.
Thank you for my call. I tuned in late, but I was trying to ask, how can a judge actually rule on somebody that has been a gangster or a gang member and call him back into or allow him back into the country?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. We're 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, it makes no sense. They're doing totally illogical things, and it's up to us, the people, to put pressure on our congressmen to say, look, you have authority. You created these inferior courts. You can uncreate them, and you need to stop these justices and take away their authority.
And you can reach out to your member of Congress at 202-224-3121 and 202-225-3121. Bill, thank you so much for your research and joining us here on the broadcast today.
Thank you, and thank all the listeners for calling in.
And, friends, let me just encourage you, within just a couple of hours from now, the contents of this program, the audio file, is going to be uploaded to our website. Would you take that and share it with others? Share the link with others to let them learn what you have learned today about the critical need to rein in judicial activism. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk, our website, crosstalkamerica.com.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.